The following content has been provided by RWTH Aachen University.
Well, number 9 is addressing diverse user needs. That basically just says we got to be aware that one design for everybody is incredibly difficult and is usually not going to work out well. Novices want more explanations. Experts want more faster interaction and less explanations. They don't want to be bothered with lots of details. So for example, as an expert, when you use a tool a lot, like maybe your text editor, your favorite one, or your mailing system or something, you value things like being able to define keyboard shortcuts, to record macros for things you do a lot, reconfigure the system, rearrange panes for display the way you like it, and you don't want to be bothered with lots of unnecessary feedback all the time. Different age ranges have different expectations from an interface. So demographics will also play a role. Technology affinity. So that basically just means do they love playing with gadgets just because they are there? Or are they more sort of normal people in the sense that, yeah, I will learn how to use the smartphone if it does something for me? That will influence also, and it varies widely among people. A lot of people say that, the elderly don't like technology. That's complete bull, to be honest. The moment you tell your grandma, hey, if you get on WhatsApp, you can join our group, and I'm sending pictures every day or two of what we're doing. And a lot of people will then be like, that sounds great. I'll learn how that works. But there has to be a clear value proposition. They may not be interested in learning WhatsApp just because it's WhatsApp. So anyway, that varies widely among people, and you need to address these different user needs. But addressing diverse user needs in a single interface might make the interface more complicated, because you might have a variety of different ways of doing the same thing. So be careful not to break rule 1. If in doubt, keeping it simple is the more important one. That may also mean that you need to focus on a user group. When I go and consult for companies and they tell me the kinds of user bases that they want to use their project with, it's always like, we want to write this one app and we want to use it here and here and here and here and here and here. And they're like, one is like a branch manager in a store, and the other one is this guy on the shop floor who needs to pack parcels. And they want to use the same app, the same UI. Usually they hate it when they find out that actually that's 2 different use cases. They need to design 2 different user interfaces. Otherwise, it's going to be suboptimal for everybody. But that's oftentimes the answer. You need to actually diversify the interface as well, although that's more development effort. To show you an example, this is a little system that a researcher at Stanford invented a couple years ago when I was working there, and I really liked this idea because it's a gesture-based menu system for touchscreens. So you are drawing with a pen on a whiteboard, on an electronic whiteboard, and when you wanted to invoke a command, you would basically hold down the pen on the screen and tap a button on the pen for half a second. Timeout, right? Sounds evil, but this meant that as a new user, you would get the pop-up menu, and you would basically cross out to the first section of this menu, come back through the second section, and this selected the, for example, zoom item command. If you got used to this thing, you learned that to zoom an item, I just need to press the button and make this gesture, kind of like a P shape there. And if you did that quickly enough, the menu wouldn't even pop up. It would simply become a gesture-based interface. So holding down the button would put the system into what we call a quasi mode, a mode that is only active while I'm holding down a button. And I do that movement, and the command is completed. If I ever forget about it, I just need to hold for a second, and then if you like tooltip, the menu appears again visually. So that's a nice way of having fluid and reversible transition between expert and novice. Because just after 3 months of usage, automatically turning off all help screens is not a good way to do it, right? Here's another example of how you define keyboard shortcuts. This is the configuration pane from OS X for configuring shortcuts. And you might say, well, that's really an expert thing to configure your shortcuts. So why is it such a graphical, sissy interface? Because while you might be an expert before you want to change keyboards, the task of changing these shortcuts is something that even as an expert you will only be doing very rarely. So the interface to actually doing that should be very easy to understand. It should not require a lot of learning, right? So everybody's basically a newbie at this application because nobody uses this every day, I hope, right? Unless you're like a masochist who likes to change their shortcuts every day and then mess up. Last rule, hiring a graphic designer. These are icons for a note-taking, sort of list managing outliner tool. And you'll notice that's graphic art, right? That's not something an engineer doodled with, Microsoft Paint or something in an afternoon. That takes a lot of graphical skill, and it's hard. So it makes a lot of sense to hire people for this. And in fact, you will even notice from the large one to the smallest icon here, it's not just scaled down. Here, do you notice what's different about the smallest version of this icon? Yeah?
The blue part is missing.
Yeah, the blue part is missing, right? He decided that at this size, at this pixel size, these few pixels available, it doesn't make sense to try to show two pages over each other because it gets too cluttered visually, so he simplified it. Those are decisions that a graphic designer has to make. This is not something that, just scaling down in Photoshop will give you. Also, the color choice is, very subtle. There's lots of gradients and drawing going on here. So, on the other hand, going back to our wonderful Evento software, not only was the crazy rampage here with the tab bars, but also obviously he seems to be one of these people who, like every engineer that I know, thinks that the world consists of three colors: full on red, full on green, and full on blue, and maybe yellow because that's full on red and full on green at the same time. Right? So surprise, surprise, colors are not binary. It doesn't mean like 255, 255, 0 is the only way to do yellow. There are different ways of doing this. So be aware of that, because if you use those kind of, but ugly colors that engineers seem to use all the time, then you are suggesting something with your colors, because the same color choice is being done in those kinds of logos, right? So it just looks cheap. It looks like nobody spent any effort in visually, graphically designing what you did there. Well, so to sum up, 10 golden rules of interface design. We've learned to keep it simple, to use words from the application domain, not from the technology cookbook, to always follow the principle of least surprise and not use timeouts and those kinds of things if we can avoid it at all. To provide feedback and provide the right level of feedback for the right kind of tasks. To give people shortcuts, helps, code pages, etc., to minimize the memory load. Don't make them type stuff twice. We learned that we want to, if possible, avoid errors to even be made. And if they are made, give people a really friendly, easy way to get out of it again. To design clear exits and close dialogues. To include help and documentation. To address the needs of beginners and experts at the same time, maybe with different interfaces. And to finally, understand that visual interfaces also need visual design skills for which, it might make sense to just hire an expert.
This content was provided by RWTH Aachen University.